just returned episode 43, my friends. You remember we had left with Gustav just before they were leaving, thinking back into the past. He could remember when he'd shot some Jewish prisoners in the concentration camp, and how a Polish Jew had told him he was Jewish and proud of it, and though he could take their lives, God would remember what he was doing. Gustav had indeed ended the prisoner's life with a single pistol shot to the head, but that calm, strong voice and the serene brown eyes had lived on in his head for decades. If Gustav denied the Nazi catechism of racial purity and the right to conquer the weak, then the voice of that Jew would undermine his whole life. All this troubled him as he prepared to leave the camp for the last time. A man can escape from many things in life, but it is very hard to escape from the past. Personal history follows like a train, and the longer a man lives, the more trucks he's pulling. And the most vivid memories, for good or bad, stay very close to the engine that is pulling them along. When Belle and her mother returned from the waterfall, Stephen observed that in manner and even in looks, they seemed like siblings rather than mother and daughter. They were obviously very pleased to see each other again, and Stephen knew that every ounce of effort that he had displayed in arranging the search was worth it. Once he'd asked a friend of his involved in mountain rescue in Snowdonia, how does it feel when you rescue someone? He'd never need to ask that question again. Soon the things they needed were being carried down to the canoes, and Belle and Gus cast their eyes over their home for about a year in this hot, wet part of the world. Gus looked at Belle and he said, "Belinda, whatever happens when we get home to England, I want you to know that this time with you in the forest have been the best time of my life." Belle gave Gus a hug. She was hugging Gus, her rescuer and friend, not Gustav Meitzer, the war criminal. "Without you, Gus, I would have died. We've had some good times and I'm grateful. Please always remember that." "Hey Belle, you saved me too. The mosquito, he nearly did for me, but he also made me tell my story. You, Belle, you do what you feel is right. I'll not beg you to ignore your conscience." Belle couldn't answer that. How did a man who presided over deaths of humans like a pest controller at a wasp's nest dare speak about conscience? She broke off her hug and they joined the others. But across the open clearing, Belle again made a vow. "I will be back." As they walked back to the canoes, Gus was broken out of his troubled malaise by the chatter of the Indians who surrounded him, laughing and showing off their fishhooks and rods. Stephen and Hermes had a drawn-out and interrupted back-and-forth conversation about the way the Indian folk were being exploited by the greedy system that was eating its way into the forest. Carlos stated that though he had never come this far up the tributary, he had traded with natives for 20 years and found them to be more honourable than many in the city of his birth, Manus. He said that in the city the buildings are large and complicated and so are the people. Here in the forest the homes are simple and so are the people. Hermes explained quite unnecessarily to Stephen that Carla didn't mean that they were mentally simple, but rather they lived a simple way of life. They also supported each other, and that was how they were supporting them today. That was true. Carla was right. They'd brought them here, and without their help at the last leg of the journey, the whole trip could have been fruitless. But for the help of the native people in the rainforest, that they'd helped them to find what was comparable to one pebble on a beach, stretching for thousands of miles. Stephen was also uneasily aware that for all his great learning, these folk with a very basic lifestyle knew secrets of this amazing environment that he hadn't got a clue about. Soon everything was loaded into the canoes, and while Carla and Hermes were afloat in one canoe with Gustav, Belle, her mother and Stephen were in the other, as the forest natives paddled with incredible skill one in the wake of the other. Belle pointed out some of the treasures of the trip up the river. The caimans, some spider monkeys, some amazing flowers that grew like water lilies but were the size of a car wheel. Blue and yellow speckled flowers in their hundreds along the water's edge in one very peaceful spot. Stephen watched as Belle took out her notebook and noted the details of the flowers. "All recorded, eh, Belinda?" "Oh yes, Stephen. Duncan and I came to explore, study, record, and so when things turned out as they did," she allowed a flicker of sadness to cross her face. But then she smiled. "I just decided that I would use our unique opportunity to record everything I've got drawings, descriptions, and I think I've got some completely undiscovered species. Oh, I'm sure you do. Well, while you were out here enjoying a field trip, I discovered a remarkable undiscovered creature myself. Stephen, Christine mockingly corrected him. I've already told her about us, she added. So what do you think, Belinda? Stephen asked, concerned. What do I think? Well, I think that if the worst university lecturer and the worst mother on earth are daft enough to go halfway around the world to rescue a dreadful lost child like me, they deserve each other. All three laughed, and so did the natives, because they got pleasure from the happiness of others. Belinda spoke again. Seriously, Stephen, I'm deeply grateful for all you've done to help Mum find me. You were always high on my list of decent humans. I remember how you helped Alistair Cullen when he got busted for his drug problem. You were the father he never had. Also, you stood between two angry students you never even knew one day and persuaded them not to fight. But most of all, I remember your lectures. Each one an enthusiastic firework display promoting the desire to learn more and more. And I've watched my poor mother struggle for years with loneliness, grief, work, a sometimes difficult teenage daughter. I've been more aware than she ever realises of all the sacrifices she's made to keep me right and to let me pursue my dreams and education. And now you two, coming to get me. Wow. If ever two heroes were made for each other, it's you two. It's usually daughters who have to get their mother's blessing, but if you're looking for mine, you can have it. In fact, if you two can find happiness together, it will add purpose to everything that's happened to me. That's lovely, Belle. You always say things so well. Christine was smiling. There's something else we need to know, Belle. Stephen was looking serious. How do you feel about flying home? Belle laughed. I was thinking about that last night. The thought of getting on a plane again scares the life out of me. Well, then we'll travel by sea. Stephen was worried about Belle's feelings. No, I'm young. I want to come back here sometime. I'll fly. I know statistically it's very safe, and the scientist in me says lightning won't strike in the same place twice. But inside me another voice says, never get in a plane again. I've got to kill that other voice. That's Belinda, Stephen. States her concerns about something and then plough straight into it. But what about Gustav, Belle? Christine was concerned for him. Didn't want to make his life hard for him. How will he feel about it? Well, maybe you'd better ask him, but I know what he'll say. He won't even think about it. Ask him to go into the reptile house at Bristol Zoo and he'll freak out. We're not worried about flying again. Oh, that's the difference between us. But it's like a little boy when he sees a snake. Belle related again the account of that the first time they encountered a snake. Ah, the irrationality of human fears, Stephen stated. Yes, Belle frowned. He's seen things more disturbing than you could ever imagine and can talk about them with calmness, but one snake, and he's terrified. Doesn't even like to look at a picture of one. When the Indians arrived the first time, he handled it so well. We didn't know that they would be our friends. Belle related the first encounter and explained that some of the men taking them up the river had been in that first party to find them, and with their hunting weapons and their wild appearance they had seemed scary enough. She admitted that she'd been intimidated, but Gus handled it so well, and that's where the photographs eventually came in. The canoes were now crossing the river and Belle was thinking about her swim. One of the canoeists pointed out to the visitors a tree, and then he clapped his hands, and soon the tree was alive with a small species of monkey, dozens of them. Everyone laughed. Pitcairn especially, because it was his joke, and universally people laugh longest at their own jokes as long as everybody else laughs first. As they neared the village, one of the women ran to tell the rest, and they left off tending their gardens behind the village and came to the shore. About 20 women and a dozen men, along with several toddlers, babies and older children. At the front with the largest smile was Taliki with little Likla. Belle, delighted to see her good friends, was the first on the shore and soon had hugged Taliki and scooped up little Likla. The little girl's dark eyes looked deeply into Belle's and she smiled and then clung around Belle's neck. Taliki took Belle's mother by the hand and led her to the village. Soon all were together in the main lodge house, and before long food and drink were being brought into the room in great quantities, and variety, and all the fuss that was being made it clear to them that there was going to be a feast. Indeed, there was going to be a feast. Belle and Gus were going to have a going away party better than any one of their friends could have arranged in either Wiltshire or Yorkshire. Soon the whole village was present. Belle and Gus were seated next to the old village elder, and Yukta and Taliki sat with them. Stephen, Christine, Carla and her maids sat close by, and the rest of the villagers were nearby. First there would be food. Fish of several varieties served on edible leaves, not unlike rhubarb leaves, but a very yellowy green. This was followed by monkey meat and some mashed vegetable, and then came the fruit. These poor people who had to work hard to exist were so pleased to share, and in abundance. Taliki and Belle seemed to be able to communicate now, understanding a few of each other's nouns, and also using signs. More than anything else, they giggled like two girls at a disco. Of course, it was not long before the Ipano was brought out, and despite Gus discouraging it, and her maids protesting, both Stephen and Carla decided to try it. Carla knew that nothing pleased the native men more, and Stephen in his own student days had tried many things. He had long ago given all drugs up, but here, well, he just had to try it. Soon some of the men and most of the women were dancing. It was the same dance that started out fairly gently, but in the course of half an hour became a wild frenzy. Christine, at Belle's urging, joined in, and Stephen, in a slightly hallucinatory state, wondered why Christine and Belle were being washed to and fro by the waves of the sea. Gus reminded Christine of a disapproving Presbyterian elder she'd once worked for in Belfast. She felt sorry for Gus though, because once everyone was enjoying themselves, he seemed to be isolated, alone in a crowded lodge house. He seemed like a polar bear in a gorilla pack. Gus, for his part, didn't mind. He was happy to observe the native way of life as long as nobody tried to impose it on him. At last the dancers exhausted themselves, as well as exhausting the watchers, most of all Gus. Stephen had to be carried to a hammock, much to the amusement of the natives. Christine was a little concerned, but she thought he would be okay in the morning. He kept mumbling stuff about the tides not supposed to invade the lecture room. Also, he didn't have a problem with students expressing their individuality in their dress and hairstyles, but coming to lectures in a state of near undress was not really appropriate for any, and especially the more mature students. Belle reassured her mother. The natives use it regularly, and it doesn't seem to do any permanent harm. I'm sure you'll not suffer much damage. Soon the village was all but silent. Little Lekla slept with Belle, and the only sound was her fairly gentle snoring of a contented people. So, a going away party. Where does it go from here? Share the next episode tomorrow. Thanks for listening, my friends. Bye for now. Bye.